All right. So picture this, okay? A society, right, where the folks in charge, the leaders, they don't have like their own private homes. And get this, they eat every single meal together. It's almost like living in a never-ending summer camp or something, right?
Yeah.
Pretty different way to run things, wouldn't you say?
For sure, for sure.
But, that's actually what we're going to be diving into today. We're going to be looking at some really foundational ideas, the kind of stuff that's shaped how we think about society for, like, centuries.
Yeah.
Welcome to the deep dive, everyone.
Absolutely.
We're all about taking those, seriously complex topics and kind of distilling them down, getting to those insights that really matter. And today we're tackling one of the big ones, Book V of Plato's Republic.
Yeah, this is the good stuff. I mean, you think about it, that unusual setup we just talked about that comes straight from Plato, Book V of the Republic, which honestly is like one of the most influential works in Western thought, period.
Right. So we've got the key parts of Book V right here with us. And our mission, if you want to join us on this little adventure, is to really understand what Plato's getting at in this section. We're talking about how he thinks society should be structured, what he believes about, well, get this, the role of women, which is super interesting.
Yeah.
Oh, and how to handle conflict, even like a sneak peek at who he thinks should be in charge, who should be calling the shots.
Right.
So think of us as your guides.
Exactly.
Your super informed companions as we journey through these ancient ideas. And trust me, they're way more relevant than you might think.
I mean, that's the thing that always gets me, right, as we dig into these concepts in Book V. It's like we're time traveling through ideas that have been shaping how we think about politics, society, everything for like literally thousands of years.
Yeah.
So, yeah, understanding this part of Plato's work, it's like getting a key. It unlocks so much about how we talk about justice, government, even just like the whole idea of what a truly ideal society could even look like. Pretty powerful stuff.
Totally. So let's jump right into it. Plato's got this vision of what he calls the good and true city or state, right?
Right.
And from the get-go, it's super obvious that he's not just describing like any random city, you know? He's making a point to compare his ideal city with all these other ways that people organize themselves. And one of the first things that just jumps out at you that's like, wait a minute, is how he describes the guardians, the ruling class, basically. They live this crazy communal lifestyle. They share homes. They share meals. It's wild. So, like, what's the big idea behind that? What's he trying to do with that setup?
Well, if you sort of connect the dots back to the core of what Plato's doing, you see that he's all about creating a state that's completely unified.
Yeah.
A place where people are loyal to the whole community of the collective rather than just focused on their own individual desires. Now, that's especially true for the guardians, right? They're the ones making the decisions. So by like taking away the distractions of private property, my house, your house, and all that stuff, and even those really strong ties to individual families, well, ideally, the guardians become completely devoted to the state, to the greater good. So yeah, I mean, sharing living spaces, it's kind of like a symbol of that. But the real point, the radical thing Plato's saying, is that the strongest loyalty, the strongest bond you should feel should be to the state, even above like your own personal comfort, your own stuff. That was a huge deal back then.
It's still a huge deal now, right? I mean, it makes you think about how much we prioritize individual freedom.
Oh, for sure, for sure. And that brings us to something that, well, let's just say it's a little controversial, shall we?
Yeah, this is the part that always throws people for a loop.
Yeah, the community of wives and children among the guardians. I mean, whoa, right? The first time you read that, it's like, hold on, what?
Yeah, it's one of those things you got to unpack carefully.
Totally. You got to get into Plato's head a little bit and see where he's coming from. But again, it all comes back to this idea of unity, of a truly cohesive state. Plato, he was worried that, families with their separate loyalties, that could undermine, like completely undermine the guardian's commitment to the state.
Makes sense in a way, right?
Yeah. It's like, if your heart is with your own little family unit, are you really going to put the state first? Always. That's the question he's asking. So by suggesting this whole community of spouses and children, what he's trying to do is kind of break down those smaller bonds, those private loyalties, and create a much bigger, stronger sense of shared identity and responsibility within the ruling class.
So everyone's kind of like one big family then.
Exactly. It's like everyone's your family and the state is what matters most.
It's a lot to wrap your head around. I mean, he's basically saying forget about romantic love, forget about blood ties. The state decides who has kids with whom. It's all about what's best for the collective, for everyone, right?
Right, right. And it gets even more structured than that. He actually talks about these holy marriage festivals where the
Mhm.
rulers, he actually compares them to like skillful
Fuel
physicians.
physicians, what does that even
Okay.
mean?
I know, right? It's a little out there. But what he means is these rulers, they're going to be the ones deciding who hooks up with who, arranging marriages that they think are going to be good for the state. And get this, he even says they might have to use a strong dose of falsehood to make it all work.
Falsehood. So he's actually saying it's okay to lie to people, to
Yeah.
manipulate them into these pairings, even if it's for like the greater good. That's kind of a slippery slope, isn't it? I mean, who decides what's good for everyone?
Yeah, this is definitely one of the most challenging parts of Plato's thinking, no doubt. But I think what he's getting at is the rulers might have to, stretch the truth a little bit, or maybe even like fudge the lottery a little when it comes to who gets paired with who at these festivals.
Mm.
Because remember, the whole point is to make sure that the best, the most capable people are the ones having kids, the ones passing on their genes. So if a little white lie helps make that happen, well, in his mind, it's probably worth it.
And it's not just about encouraging certain people to have kids together. He goes all in on this idea. He talks about selective breeding, like literally pairing the good with the good. And, well, you can guess what happens to the bad.
Right. It's like he's creating a breeding program for the ideal citizen, and he's very blunt about it. He says the offspring of those considered good, they get raised by the community, but those considered bad, well, they're dealt with differently. It's a pretty stark vision, and to be honest, pretty disturbing from a modern perspective.
Yeah, it's tough to read that and not think about, some of the really dark places eugenics has led in history.
Absolutely. This is without question one of the most controversial aspects of Plato's Republic. It's important to acknowledge that. But I think if we're trying to understand him, we have to remember that he's writing this over 2,000 years ago in a completely different context. His concerns were about creating a society that was, in his view, as just and stable as possible. And for him, that meant making sure the right kind of people were in charge and that those people were, well, producing the right kind of offspring.
And it doesn't stop there.
Mhm.
He's got rules about when you can even have kids. He says guardians can only have children between certain ages, like 25 to 55 for men and 20 to 40 for women.
Mhm.
And he implies that if you have kids outside those ages, well, let's just say it's not going to be good.
Right. He calls those unions unholy and unrighteous. I think he's concerned about people having kids too young or too old because, in his mind, it might lead to weaker offspring, which, again, goes back to his obsession with making sure the guardian class is as strong and capable as possible.
So it's all about control, right?
Yeah.
Making sure that everything is done in a way that benefits the state.
I mean, that's the core of his philosophy, yeah.
Mhm.
Control, order, these are really big things for Plato. He wants to eliminate as much randomness as possible, even with something as personal as having children.
I mean, I guess you got to give him points for being thorough, right?
Yeah.
He's not leaving anything to chance. He even mentions these proper officers who will be in charge of like managing the whole reproduction and child rearing system.
Mm.
And he says they could be men or women.
Yeah, that's interesting, right? That he specifically mentions that women could be involved in this crucial role. It hints at a broader idea that we're going to get into a little later. This idea that women are, in many ways, just as capable as men, at least when it comes to ruling and governing. But yeah, back to your point about control. I mean, it's everywhere in Plato's vision of the ideal state.
It makes me wonder, though, what happens when there's a war. You've got these guardians. They're supposed to be the protectors of the state, but they're also forbidden from knowing their own kids,
Right.
right? I mean, doesn't that create like this huge emotional vulnerability? Like imagine you're fighting a war and you could lose your, well, I guess technically not your kids, but the children you helped raise, the next generation of guardians.
Yeah.
And the kids, they could lose their parents, the people who raised them. I mean, that's got to be devastating.
That's a great point. And I don't think Plato ignores this. He does seem to acknowledge that there's a risk there. But I think his underlying assumption is that the guardians are so committed to the state, so utterly devoted to its survival, that they'll be able to push through that grief, that sense of loss. And remember, they haven't formed those deep personal attachments that we might feel in our society. So the pain, while it's still there, it might not be as sharp as all-consuming.
So he's banking on this intense loyalty to the state to override like basic human emotions.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds kind of cold, right?
Yeah, it does. It does.
But remember, Plato's looking at this from a very, very logical perspective. He's trying to create a system that's as strong and as rational as possible. And for him, emotions, they're kind of like, well, they're kind of a wild card. They can lead to bad decisions, you know?
Okay, I get it. Still feels a bit intense, though.
Oh, for sure. Plato's not messing around when it comes to creating his ideal state.
All right, let's move on to something a little less intense.
Okay, yeah.
Let's talk about, well, this is something that might surprise you. Plato's idea of equality for women. At least when it comes to the guardian class, he's actually way ahead of his time on this one. So what's his argument here? Why does he think women should have an equal role?
Yeah, this is where it gets really fascinating. So Plato, he makes this really compelling argument for women having the same education as men and also the same roles in society, at least within the guardian class, right? And his reasoning, it's actually pretty simple. He says men and women, they have the same basic nature, the same potential. Now, he does throw in this little caveat. He suggests that maybe women have these qualities, these capabilities to a slightly lesser degree.
A lesser degree. Come on, Plato.
I know, right? A little bit of a backtrack there. But his main point, the thing he keeps coming back to, is that it would be totally foolish for the state to ignore half of its population when it comes to finding the best, the most capable people to be rulers, to be guardians.
It's like he's saying, hey, if a woman is smart, if she's brave, if she's got what it takes to be a leader, then why not let her lead?
Exactly. Gender shouldn't be the deciding factor.
Pretty progressive for ancient Greece, right?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, we're talking about a society where women were, for the most part, confined to the home. You know, their roles were very limited. And here's Plato saying, nope, let's throw that out the window. If a woman has the potential to be a great guardian, let's give her the training. Let's give her the opportunity.
And it's not just talk. He actually envisions women training for war, fighting alongside men. He even has this image of them stripping, clothed in their chastity, which I gotta say is a pretty striking image, right?
Oh, for sure. It's definitely a memorable image. And I think it's important to note that he emphasizes chastity. He's not saying, like, let's have a free-for-all, you know? What he's suggesting is that women can be strong. They can be warriors, but they should still maintain a certain level of decorum, a certain level of self-control. Remember, order and control, these are big themes for Plato.
So even when he's pushing boundaries, he's still got those boundaries, right?
Exactly. He's radical, but within limits. And again, it all comes back to what he believes is best for the state. Excluding capable women just because they're women, well, that's a loss for everyone that weakens the state.
Okay, so we've got this pretty unique picture of how society is structured, right? We've got this guardian class that lives communally, no private property, no traditional families, men and women are equal, at least within that class. What happens when this ideal state, how does it deal with other city-states? Especially when it comes to, you know, the big one, war.
Yeah. Plato, he actually has some pretty interesting ideas about how his ideal state would handle conflict, especially when it comes to other Greek city-states.
So how does it work? Does he go full, like, conquer the world mode?
No, actually, it's kind of the opposite. What's really cool here is that Plato emphasizes this idea of Hellenic unity. He says that Greeks, they shouldn't really be fighting each other at all. He sees those conflicts, even wars, as more like, you know, family squabbles, like a quarrel among friends is how he puts it.
So not really war then, more like disagreements.
Yeah, and because of that, because he sees all Greeks as like part of this bigger family, he says the ideal state would never enslave or destroy another Greek city-state. The goal would be to correct them, to help them get back on the right path, but not to wipe them out.
So no burning down cities, no taking slaves.
Exactly. He's against all that. He says that Greeks should treat each other with respect, even in conflict, because ultimately they share the same culture, the same values.
That's a lot more humane than what was going on in the real world back then, right?
Right.
I mean, think about the Peloponnesian War. The Spartans were notorious for, like, brutal tactics.
Yeah, and that's the point, right? Plato's presenting an ideal, a vision of how things should be. He's not necessarily describing how things actually were.
It does make you wonder, though, how his ideal state would deal with non-Greeks, right? If all Greeks are like family, does that mean everyone else is like the enemy?
That's a great question. And to be honest, Plato doesn't really go into detail about that. But I think it's safe to say that his ideal state would still operate based on principles of justice and fairness, even when dealing with non-Greeks. The goal wouldn't be conquest for its own sake, you know? It would be about spreading those values, those principles that he believes are essential for a just and flourishing society.
Okay, I'm following you.
Okay.
So we've talked about how the ideal state is structured, how it handles conflict, all that. But who's actually running this thing? Who's in charge? Towards the end of Book 5, Plato starts to drop some hints, and it all points towards, well, this might surprise you, philosophers.
Yeah, this is where we start to see the seeds of one of Plato's most famous and controversial ideas, the philosopher-king.
So he's not talking about, like, a king who just happens to like philosophy. He's saying philosophers should be the rulers. Like, literally.
Literally, yeah. He starts to lay out this idea that philosophers, true philosophers, they have this unique understanding of the world. He says they grasp the nature of true being, and they get all the big concepts: justice, beauty, truth, stuff that, in his view, most people just don't understand.
And why is that? Why are philosophers so special in his eyes?
Well, Plato believed in this realm of perfect forms. Think of them like blueprints or ideals of things like justice and beauty. They exist outside our everyday world in this higher realm. And he argued that philosophers, through like intense training, they can actually access these forms, they can understand them. And because of that, they have this wisdom, this insight that makes them, well, uniquely qualified to lead.
So it's not just about being smart or even well-educated. It's about having this deeper understanding of how things really are, right?
Right, exactly. They see the big picture, the true nature of reality, which most people caught up in their everyday lives just miss.
Okay, so let me get this straight. He's saying that to be a good ruler, you need to be a philosopher.
Mm.
But hold on, he also lays out this like crazy long list of qualities that these philosophers should have. They got to hate falsehood, they got to be totally absorbed in the pursuit of knowledge, they got to have this like cosmic perspective on time and existence. Oh, and they got to be social, gracious, fearless, but not arrogant, quick learners, good memory, and like totally at peace with themselves. I mean, come on. Is he describing a human being or like a
Yeah.
perfect being?
I know, right? It's a pretty tall order, but that's Plato for you. He's always striving for the ideal. And I think what he's doing here is he's laying out the blueprint for the perfect ruler. Someone who's not just smart and capable, but also morally good. Someone who genuinely wants what's best for everyone.
Okay, it's a nice idea, but come on, let's be real. In the real world, philosophers, they don't always have the best reputation, do they? I mean, I think a lot of people would say they're more like, impractical dreamers, or worse, kind of like out-of-touch weirdos.
Yeah, that's true. And that's actually a point that gets brought up in the Republic. One of the characters, Adimantus, he challenges Plato on this. He says, hey, in real life, philosophers are often seen as rogues or fools. How can you say these are the people who should be running things?
That's a good point. So how does Plato respond to that?
Well, he doesn't shy away from it. He acknowledges that, yeah, there's a disconnect between how philosophers are often perceived and how he thinks they should be. And that sets the stage for Book 6, where he really digs into this whole idea of the philosopher-king. He tries to explain why, despite how they might seem, philosophers are actually the best equipped to rule.
Okay, so he's got an answer. He's just saving it for later. But it does sound like he knows that his ideal state, with all its unusual rules, it might not be so easy to actually make happen, right?
Absolutely. He even says outright that it might seem impossible to put these laws into practice, but he also insists that if it were possible, it would be the best, the most just form of government.
So he's not saying it's going to happen, but he's saying if it did, it would be amazing.
Right. He's presenting a vision, a possibility. And I think he knows it's a radical vision, one that would be really hard to implement in the real world.
He even talks about these two great waves that can make it really difficult to make this ideal state a reality. And those waves are, well, first, that whole community of wives and children thing, which we already talked about. And second, this idea of philosophers as rulers, which we're going to get into more later.
Yeah, those are the two ideas that he thinks would probably meet the most resistance, because they're so different from how most societies operate.
So, to wrap things up, in Book 5, Plato lays out the foundation of his ideal state. He gives us a picture of this guardian class that lives in a totally different way than anyone else. No private property, shared families, men and women equal. And he starts to hint at why he thinks philosophers should be in charge.
And we have to remember that everything he proposes, it all comes back to this idea of creating a state that's unified, just, and focused on the common good.
Yeah, it definitely makes you think. I mean, looking at our society today, with all our emphasis on individual freedom and, family being this sacred thing, I wonder what Plato would make of it all. Would he see it as like a step backwards?
That's the question, isn't it? Do you think he'd say we've gone too far in the direction of individualism? Have we lost sight of the common good in the process? Something to think about.
For sure. And these are the kinds of questions that make Plato so relevant, even today, He forces us to think about the big picture, about how we want to live together, how we want to organize society. And we've really just scratched the surface of the Republic. There's so much more to explore. Join us next time as we continue our deep dive into this incredible work. Until then, keep thinking, keep questioning, and we'll see you back here soon.